Why, hello everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Postcolonial Ponderings. I'm Emmy, and I will be the host for today's episode. Joining us, we have Abigail, Evania, Eli, Max, and Rachel. Leading today's discussion is Evania, and she will be introducing us to a very interesting topic. Before we get started, I'd like to point you to our introduction podcast in case you haven't seen it already, though at this point I hope you have. And it will help you with any terms and topics that you are confused about while Evania is talking. And with that, I'm going to let Evania take the stage.
All right. Hey, everybody. So I am doing a post-colonial feminist perspective on both the God of Small Things and Jumping Monkey Hill. So I have a bunch of different sources that I'm using, and one of my primary sources is Geriachi Spivak's Can the Subaltern Speak? So first, I'm going to start out by talking a little bit about that source. And also, important information. My thesis for this is basically that these two texts, The God of Small Things and Jumping Monkey Hill, show that the subaltern cannot speak, and talking about deconstructionist, decolonial, subaltern feminism. So, Can the Subaltern Speak is one of the key pieces, and it actually helped to establish post-colonial criticism. While I won't pretend to understand all of Spivak, I do want to use the parts that I do understand to emphasize my work. So, something that's very important to know about this is that the subaltern that Spivak refers to is the colonized, or really anyone that is misrepresented, underrepresented in the margins of society. They are thought of as the other, and violence is done to that group. The subaltern can also be used to refer to women because of the similar way that the sense of other is weaponized against her. Dominance and violence are used to overtake her and silence her voice. Spivak starts her paper by talking a lot about the other critics that have come before her, such as Karl Marx and Derrida, and pointing out why they're wrong, what things they have missed in their theories. She wants someone to listen to her, so she's doing the groundwork. A man would likely not have to prove that everyone else in this field failed in some way in order to be listened to, but she does. She ends her paper by saying that the subaltern can't speak, at least not in a way that they can be heard by the colonizer. Alright, so right after that, I have another source, which is a scholarly source that read Spivak and gave some insights into it. And this source suggests that Spivak introduces deconstructive feminism. So, for anybody who doesn't know what deconstruction is, the very basic understanding of it is that it takes binary oppositions, which is male and female, colonized and colonizer in this case, and it deconstructs them or flips them around. So, it also says that marginality is a key concept for Spivak, and it introduces the concept of wordling, which is the process by which we get the West and the other. It happens whenever the West speaks for the native and tries to represent them. It also points out that something that Spivak says is that the subaltern doesn't necessarily know everything about themselves in order to correctly represent themselves. And it's also true that if we tried to get one representative, even from the group of subaltern, they couldn't represent the entire group. And that's another reason that the subaltern cannot speak for themselves. Alright, going into the God of Small Things and how that helps to represent some of these concepts. We have a moo in the book, which basic premise, a moo is someone who marries, is with a man named Bethuel, who is in a lower caste in Indian society. So there are love laws against this, and they're not supposed to be in love. But part of Amu's resistance to that patriarchal authority and those love laws um, was to love him anyway. But it's not like her voice was really listened to. She was silenced with violence, and so was Thethula. Um, it's also true that her mother, Mamachi, I don't know if I'm saying these names right, but anyway, um, Mamachi was both psychologically and physically abused. So that's another representation of how violence is often used to silence the subaltern. Something that's really sad about Mamachi, though, is that she internalized a lot of those patriarchal structures and she ends up enforcing them and using aggression and domination to continue that cycle of silencing the subaltern and silencing her daughter. Um, so, yeah, the basic premise here is that the untouchable and the female in this book help to represent the subaltern, and they both were silenced. Alright. So, something that also is important to note, and that Gary Archie sometimes noted in her works, is that feminism itself is often westernized. Sometimes, in speaking for the rights of women, we don't represent all women, including the colonized and people of different ethnicities. Uh, so, yeah, the question is, can the subaltern speak, whether they're the colonized or the women? It's also interesting to note that there are some ecofeminist things in The God of Small Things. The way that men dominate and abuse nature in this book is similar to the way that they dominate and abuse the subaltern in the book. One quote from the book is that the main characters are mentioned as being bullied all their lives by someone big. And that can represent how their small voices were thought of as insignificant, and instead, the bigger people in society, the ones that have the power, are bullying them and silencing them. And Moo challenges this idea, and she loves someone who is supposed to be unlovable. And I think it's really important here that in breaking this patriarchal structure and these laws that restrict her and silence her voice, her power as a woman and as a mother is able to show, and she's able to listen to and value the subaltern in her actions. It's very cool how Thethula in the book also resists against the injustice in the society. He is in the riot, and Amu challenges this just by her love. It's also really cool how Bethula just exists in nature and plays in it, hangs out in it instead of dominating it like a lot of the other characters in the book. Okay, yeah. Another interesting thing about the abuse that Mamuchi goes through is that she gets beaten even more by her husband when he retires from working for the government, and her pickle business starts doing well, which shows that she can exist without him and independently. So he just beats her back down. Mamuchi just accepts these beatings, and she seems to accept the role Indian women are given in her society. She thinks that everyone, the untouchables and the women, should just accept their place in society. But her daughter Amu doesn't accept this. She sees her father as a monstrous, suspicious bully, and instead she decides to love Bethula. So the patriarchal superiority that justifies the suppressions of women and other beings is just a very key thing in this book. Yeah, but Emu, whenever her first husband starts beating her children, she leaves and takes them with her and resists that violence. She also states that the society that she's in is a male chauvinistic society. So she sees these problems in it and she's really not okay with it. Let's see. So, a suggestion that I have to this would be decolonial feminism. And decoloniality, it's a school of thought which basically it gets rid of the episteme or overarching idea that allows Europe and the West to be over the East. So it critiques the idea that Western thought is supreme and that it's better. And this episteme can cause a lot of violence. So, one suggestion that I have to post-colonialism and all the damage that comes from it is to deconstruct that episteme and to also deconstruct the binary of male and female, which sets up a hierarchical binary which puts male at the top. Um, I haven't mentioned jumping on Monkey Hill yet. Um, so I'm going to talk about that briefly because I have a lot here, but we're getting close to time. So, with jumping on Monkey Hill, that's a very good representation of the subaltern's voice being silenced because, for one thing, there's a bunch of Africans there, and they're trying to present literature from their perspectives and using their voices. But Edward, who is there, is constantly telling them that the stories that they want to present aren't okay, and he's trying to get them to express themselves in the exact way that he wants them to, or he won't publish them. So he silences their voice. It's also true that in this story, women are dehumanized, and so are the subaltern, and they're thought of as objects. So Edward really objectifies the main character in this book and keeps her silent, just like an object. It's also true that when Edward makes uncomfortable sexist comments towards the main character, none of the other people in her group, the other subalterns, speak up for her either. So they're completely silenced. And this is an example of hegemonic alienation when the dominant hegemony or powerful structure alienates people from each other, sometimes even people that are in the same group. So yeah, very quickly, it's also true that Derrida and Spivak have some direct converse. So Spivak wrote a paper that directly commented on Derrida's work. So the idea of deconstructionist feminism is not, it's one that goes with what she has to say anyway. All right, does anybody have any questions?
Yeah, I do. Can you hear me all right?
Yeah,
Okay, awesome. Um, I was just kind of wondering, coming at this um, just like, is there any kind of hope for any of this? In any of your research, did you find any ways in which we can make this better or bridge this gap or kind of like hear those silenced voices? And I know that I don't know if you just came across that in your research or just kind of like how me as a white American can try to like hear the voices of those that are silenced so often. I didn't know if you'd come across that.
yeah, that's a really good question. I think that if we go off of Spivak, her main idea is that the subaltern just can't speak no matter what. But the author of The God of Small Things, it seems like, and some other people that we read too, I'd say that part of their mission was to give voices to people who experience post-colonialism and people that aren't often listened to. And honestly, my own opinion is that by taking this class and by reading the voices that are usually silenced and trying to understand their perspective, understand the damage that we did to them through colonialism, that maybe Spivak's right to an extent, and we can't fully understand everything or fully hear them. But I at least think that that's a good step in the right direction.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you, Evania. I feel like there is a little bit of hope. I don't know how much of it, but I feel like as Americans, we participate in this sort of silencing the subaltern when we listen to rumors like stupid rumors like, oh, like Africa doesn't have electricity type of stuff, like, or air conditioning, like then obviously that's not true, but there's people out there that actually believe this stuff, and I feel like we need to properly educate ourselves on well, of course the past, but present as well. I feel like there's so much emphasis and teaching and learning on the past, and we need to also focus on the present. What's it like there now, for us to be able to get to a place where we can start to let the subaltern speak.
I think, Rachel, you have a really great point, is that we learn so much about the past, and while it's really good to learn from previous mistakes so we don't repeat those mistakes, I think there needs to be a greater emphasis on how that learning that we've done can be applied to our actual lives. Because all well and dandy to say, oh, well, this is what they did. Like, okay, that's what they did, but how do we incorporate that into how we can do better? And I don't think a lot of people are really talking as much about that. And especially like when it comes to certain subaltern communities, when you have these people who are so suppressed with their voices not being able to be heard, and everyone, well, not everyone, but a lot of people in the US are like, yeah, there's all these people that can't be heard. What are we doing about it? I think there's too much, or I think there's not a proper balance between saying stuff and doing stuff, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point to bring up. And yeah, kind of what I've heard from both of you is just how, if you're not going to do anything else, just at least educating yourself is hugely important. But
The question that I had was, because something I really liked that you talked about was how like even the subaltern can't fully like know itself because it's such a diverse like body of experiences and such a diverse group of people. And anytime one member of that community speaks, it's still not going to be comprehensive of the whole group of the subaltern. And I was just wondering if there is anything you came across in your research kind of about how maybe we, when we are trying to like educate ourselves and trying to look for those voices to get different like snapshots maybe of the subaltern experience, what kind of things to look for to find maybe the voices that are still continuing to go get looked over?
That's a great question. But that idea that the subaltern can't represent themselves because it isn't like one unified voice from one person that you could hear, that's from Spivak, and she's someone who thinks that the subaltern can't speak. So sadly, she doesn't present a solution to that. She just thinks it's impossible.
Maybe Spivak doesn't think there's a solution to that, but do you think there's a solution to that personally?
I think that there are ways that we can work on it, but I kind of agree that there might not be a perfect solution to it. It's also true that in history and the way that we write history, so many voices have been silenced. of people on the margins, of the subaltern. And some of those voices we probably can't even get back because, history is written by the victor. And so I think there are things like, how we read some literature from both Israelis and Pakistanis. That might be one way to get just like more information from different experiences and stuff to try and hear the subaltern better. But I definitely think there are some things that will always stand in our way.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you so much, Evania. I think that went into a lot of like really cool, interesting stuff. That is definitely like hard to think about because I definitely am like solution-based person. So I'm like, how can I fix things? But I think it's also just a good understanding to come at that it's like we may never fully understand someone, but also just going in it with like an empathetic, trying to hear from all angles is really important. But cool.
And if those listening have any ideas and they just want to comment, they just want to jump in and tell us what you think, we love to hear it. And if that's all for questions and everything, I think that does it for this episode. Thanks, Evania, for the wonderful explanations and the research you did on feminism and postcolonialism. And thank you so much to our wonderful listeners, and specifically Dr. Hughes, for tuning into today's podcast. If what we talked about today has piqued your interest, check out our other podcasts. Have a great rest of your day. Bye.
Chowder.
Bye.